Hello everybody, I am Angry Bird. Welcome to a new series on my YouTube channel. It's been something that I've had in mind for a long time now, and we finally got the concept realized and we're putting it out in a video, and hopefully this will be the first of many. We are doing a pro deck review. This series aims to bring you top tier 1v1 decks for you to use. So we're starting off with Shaun and the 25th Panzergrenadier division, and I had to start this process off with Shaun. I'm really glad that he's worked with me on this, so thank you, Shaun, if you watch this video. Hopefully you will. I had to start with Shaun. He was the winner of Steel Division League Season 1 and arguably the best player in Steel Division 2. It was fitting that we have the first video being one of Shaun's decks. So this deck, the 25th Panzergrenadier division, this deck was recently used in the cast against Kato Megumi.zz, and you can go back and look at that game, look at the cast, and really see how this deck works. The deck we've got for you today is an updated version following Fate of Finland, so if you're watching this in the future, bear in mind that patch changes may have taken place and things could be slightly different. So first thing I want to do is talk in general about the deck, then we're going to look at each of the tabs specifically and cover some specific units, and then we're going to summarize things up. So first off, first thing I did is ask Shaun what his general game plan was when he plays this deck. So Shaun said, in essence, he uses the SPW with 3-star Panzergrens to show aggressive action early on, and we saw that in the match against Kato Megumi.zz. So watch his early aggression in A phase. He then said he looks to root out any IGs and AT guns with the ME410 fighter bomber, and then he proceeds to play the game as normal, trade as efficiently as he can, and obviously as a balanced deck in C phase you have the income advantage. Okay, so let's have a look at some specific units. I'm not going to concentrate on every unit, but I'm going to pick out the ones that I think are pretty important to look at. So I asked Shaun, why does he take the SPW 233 in particular in A phase over the SDKFZs? And his response was that the SDKFZ 250/8 is pretty much just an inferior version of the SPW 233. It doesn't have the AP shells, it doesn't have the heat shells, but it does cost 10 points less. He did point out that the SDKFZ 250-10 was a better option, does have the AP and the HE shells, and he did say if he had some more point he probably would take the 250/10. But he is playing a balanced deck, so we have to remember resources are tight at the start of the game, so he's just opting to take the one card of SPW 233 in A phase and the one card of SPW 231 in B phase. I think if we were looking at a Vanguard deck, we would definitely see more recon vehicles in here. If we look at the infantry tab, I think one of the strengths of the 25th Panzergren is just the number of Panzergrens you can get. Panzergrens are strong infantry units. They do excel at long ranges, medium and long range engagements, so most people opt to take the Panzergrens in A phase at no star vet, but Shaun obviously opts to take them at 1-star veterancy and doesn't choose the Panzergrens with the Panzerfaust, which you could get for the same amount and at the same veterancy in A phase. So I asked him why he makes that choice. He basically said that veterancy is the key in early phase infantry engagement, and he actually points out that he picked this up from Amber T. He says that 3-star Panzergrens are really deadly. So it's not necessarily a choice that I would always make myself, but for Shaun the veterancy is the key. And obviously at 1-star vet, these Panzergrens, they're going to be up vetted with a leader and the commander up to 3 stars. I also asked Shaun why he takes the Stoss Troop in B phase rather than A phase, because we tend to see the Stoss Troop always taken in A phase. So Shaun pointed out that these can stand up to the Blagite Pioneer, at a 2-to-1 ratio. So if you've got 2 squads of Stoss Troop, they cost 20 points each, that's 40 points, up against 1 card of Blagite Pioneers, that also costs 40 points, the Stoss Troop can beat them. And I guess that makes sense, they will have 10 MP44s and 2 squads throwing Molotov cocktails. So he points out that having them in B phase gives them more STOS troops available to him, 12 in B phase versus 6 in A phase. So he uses them, you know, he doubles them up in groups and uses them together. I think I would point out as well is that, again, this is a balanced deck, so you don't need the same amount of aggression in A phase that you might need with a Vanguard deck. And these are really good units, like Shaun says, so often we do see them taken in A phase to give you that extra oomph in the early game. Okay, so moving on to the tank tab. Shaun's obviously taken all 3 cards of Stug 3Gs, and it's a bit of a no-brainer for this deck. But interestingly, he's opted to up-vet his A phase and B phase Stugs to 2-star veterancy. I think the key thing here is that you get the extra 3 rounds a minute rate of fire, and you also get an extra 10% accuracy by up-vetting to 2-star. On top of that, you don't really lose too many Stugs by doing it. You can have 5 in A phase unvetted, whereas up-vetting them to 2-star, you only lose 2 Stugs to 3. And Shaun pointed out that that's quite a key reason, was that 70 points in A phase for a balanced deck is a big investment. So if you lose all 3 of these Stugs, that's 210 points lost in A phase. For a balanced deck, it hurts. So I think for him it's all about the limited resources that you have in a balanced income. Because you don't have resources to call in all 5, there's no point taking 5, so you can up-vet them to 2-star. Moving on to the support tab. It's interesting, in the match against Kato Megumi.zz, Shaun delayed the use of his Flammenwerfers until B phase, and I don't think it's something I've really seen before, so I was interested in if that's a specific reason he did in that game, or whether it's something he does overall in most of his games. He did point out that for the Axis, they don't really rely on the flamethrower units as much as the Allies do to kind of grab ground early, and that's because the Opal Blitz, the main transport for the infantry units, is much faster than the Studebaker. Also, because he doesn't need to be mega aggressive early on in A phase, he can afford to, you know, hold on to those Flammenwerfers. And if you see an opportunity for them at 15 points, Flammenwerfers are cheap, but they're still really good units, especially to use in heavy forest. I was also interested as well why he takes the IG-18s and the MG-42s in A phase, and also why the MG-42s, he has 2 cards of them, one in A phase and one in B phase, so I felt they seemed like quite a key unit for him in this deck. I think it boiled down to flexibility here, so the IG-18 and the MG-42, they kind of fulfill the same role. They are infantry support guns, they're used at range to take out the enemy infantry units. But there are times when you kind of want an IG there, but there isn't some heavy cover for you to put the IG in, but there is a building available, so you can put the MG-42 in there instead of the IG-18. And I think it was that flexibility was the reason that Shaun takes both the IG-18 and the MG-42 in A phase. Another interesting point with this deck, there's no Opal Blitz munitions in here, no supply whatsoever. Now, when we look at the artillery tab a little later on, there are quite a few artillery units in there, so it's kind of a surprise not to see a supply truck. I asked Shaun why he hasn't got a supply truck in there, and he mentioned the new meta with less critical hit chance on vehicles due to the Fate of Finland patch means that he doesn't need the supply trucks as much. I think that's to refill kind of their AP CR shells. He also just said that he doesn't tend to use all of his supply. And I think the big thing here is that if he was to put that supply card in the deck, it would cost him 3 points. So he'd have to remove another card somewhere. It's costly for a supply truck. Still an interesting choice though, because you don't see many top competitive 1v1 players that don't take a supply truck. If we have a look at the anti-tank tab, I think it's a pretty versatile tab. I didn't have any specific questions for Shaun. It has really good AT options available to it, which is why this 25th Panzergrenadier is a good deck. We have the Pak 40s, it's a really good AT gun. It can handle pretty much everything up to an IS-2 on the Russian side and the King Tiger obviously on the German side. But even then, with the APCR shells, it still has 190mm of penetration. So if you hold on to those APCR shells, you can still penetrate an IS-2. Even with the main gun, it's 105mm of penetration, so you can easily get a nice side shot onto an IS-2 or a King Tiger. The Pak 40 is a really good AT gun. On top of that, you've got access to a Pak 43. 230mm of penetration, you can penetrate that thing, I think, at max range, 2 kilometer range, and it's got 60% accuracy as well. The one thing about this tab is the AT gun options are kind of fairly expensive, especially compared to the Soviet side, so you can't really spam out the AT guns. You can't bring out a ton of these AT guns. You have to pick and choose, you know, the moments, and especially on balanced as well. You don't get a lot of early income. And if we move on to the anti-air tab, well, this is a really limiting factor for the 25th Panzergrenadier. They struggle on their anti-air options. You've only got 2 cards available, 2 slots available, and Shaun's obviously opting to take both. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer, really. Interesting, he has taken the Flak 38s with the SDKFZ 11 flak, so he is doubling up on the 20mm here. So if you call in that Flak 38, you do have 2 20mm at a time. He chooses to up-vet them to 1 star, and it's interesting watching Shaun as well. He definitely concentrates his anti-air around a leader unit or the commander to give them that 2-star or 3-star veterancy, and these can still be really potent at 2-star and 3-star veterancy. And then we have the SDKFZ 7-1 in C phase. It's an expensive unit, but it is a really good anti-air unit. So although they don't get a lot of options, you've still got, you know, the best AA piece in the game. It's just you have to wait till C phase to bring it out. Okay, looking at the artillery tab now, I think this is where you can personalize the deck a little bit more. I think you could look at lighter options earlier on. The 100 points for a K331F 105mm in A phase, it's a full tick of income. But he does bring it in with the multi-munitions truck to give it that extra supply. You could look at something like an 81mm mortar, but you aren't going to get that supply truck, and remember, you don't have one in the support tab. We do have the Nebelwerfer of 42. I was interested in if there are specific targets that Shaun uses this against, and he said that he mostly targets it at AA and mortar half tracks, and it also can be used to take out heavy tanks like IS-2 or King Tigers if he can't deal with it in another way. He also points out that once you start bombing the enemy's IGs and the enemy's AT guns with your planes, they are going to bring in anti-air units to counter that. The Nebelwerfer 42 is then fantastic at aiming against those anti-air units. Finally, we're onto the air tab, and obviously we've got to point out the ME410A1 here. I think it is probably one of the stars of the 25th Panzergrenadier. I don't think I would have picked this out when the game released or when the division came out, but definitely the 250kg bombs. This will just get rid of IGs, you know, OB25s, AT guns in one hit. And so getting good use out of this, it's only 100 points. It's a really good plane. Other options available, the ME410 Tank Buster. Again, Tank Buster planes, they are really quite strong. I think the IL-237 is a stronger plane on the Soviet side, but Shaun's got 7 of them in his deck, so you can take out a lot of tanks with these planes. Another interesting thing here is he's opted to take the ME109 G4 fighter planes in B phase rather than take them in A phase. I didn't ask Shaun about this, but I imagine the reason is in A phase you only get 3, in B phase you get 6. 3 is not enough for you to hold on throughout the entire game, especially if you're playing a balanced deck. You know the game is going to go fairly long. You want it to go long because it benefits your income. So I definitely think 3 planes is not enough. So Shaun just utilizes his Flak 3820s in A phase, and then he brings out the fighters in B phase. And you know, it's tough to argue with that. Now we've seen all the units in the deck, I wanted to talk about the deck overall, what it's good at, what it's not so good at. So in terms of maps, Shaun pointed out that the division's fairly flexible, but he specifically outlined that Slutsk and Gora Kalwaria are maps that he looks to avoid. I think the reason is those maps are very open maps and they tend to be dominated by the heavy tanks, the King Tigers, the IS-2s. Although this division can take those out, it's not ideal. You don't necessarily want to be up against them on a map that they can dominate on. Yes, you can take out IS-2s and King Tigers, and it is a good thing about this division, but that's on maps that maybe benefit you. You can still handle those. But on a map that really benefits those divisions, you don't want this division to take it on. So in terms of specific divisions, I asked if Shaun likes to play this deck against certain divisions or whether he doesn't want to face certain divisions. Like we said before, it's a fairly flexible division. You can handle those heavy tanks, so there isn't really too many specific divisions. He did say this division doesn't play well against air heavy type of division. So if there's a division where it's very focused on air force, then this deck is not necessarily the best. Also, very infantry heavy divisions on maps that suit them. So something like, you know, Rima Rapana, maybe something like the Army of Krahawa on a map that really suit, you know, specialist infantry divisions. I think this can suffer as well. Also asked about incomes, you know, are there specific incomes you take this against or you wouldn't take this against? Now, Shaun always plays balanced and he's pretty happy facing off against most incomes. And I think this deck is built definitely to face off against Vanguard and Maverick incomes. The one thing he could struggle slightly is facing off against another balanced deck. 102 units in the infantry tab, it is not the most infantry units. Panzergrens are very good, you've got the MG42s to help you out. It's just, I think against a very dedicated long game deck, this could start to suffer if the game goes beyond an hour. Okay, so finally, if we talk about you customizing this deck, obviously this is Shaun's deck. This works to his playstyle. You may want to customize it slightly. I think we pointed out earlier that Shaun felt that definitely the artillery tab could be customized. And also you could adjust the planes to bring in depending on how you play and the divisions you're going up against. I asked Shaun, you know, if he was playing against this deck, how he would counter it. And he definitely pointed out the lack of AA. He would try and take out the AA and then use as much light anti-tank units and support weaponry as he could use. I think one thing I'm going to do with this series as well is try and rank how hard these decks are to use, because these are the pros decks and sometimes divisions can be really hard to play, especially if you're like a beginner, if you're a new player. So I don't necessarily always recommend you picking up and using these decks as an absolute brand new player. Some decks you'll be able to do that with, some decks you won't. You need at least some experience microing the SPWs and using them well to play this deck effectively. The lack of AA is really hard if you don't know how to deal with that. So he rated the deck as kind of like an intermediate deck. I think personally, my opinion is probably more on the advanced side. The reason I say this is because it uses the balanced deployment type, and I think that is something that Shaun is really used to using, and he plays balanced really well, but it can be difficult to play balanced income against Vanguard and Maverick. Finally, in summary, let's have a look at the strengths, the weaknesses, and then the opportunities and threats for this deck. So I think in terms of strengths, this deck is quite versatile. It gives you quite a lot of options. I think AT wise, you've got the Pak 40s, the Pak 43, you've got the AT gun planes. The Panzergrens are strong, they're good against the majority of infantry. Stugs are a decent tank, they're good against a lot of medium tanks that they can come up against. The AA, it isn't strong, but then you have the SDKFZ-71, that is a strong AA piece. You have quite a lot of artillery options, you know, it can be customized a little bit. You also have the ME-410 fighter bomber, that's a very good bomber. It can be used to deal with a lot of different targets. You have those anti-tank planes as well. I think another big strength for me is the anti-tank options in the anti-tank tab. The Pak 40, a fantastic anti-tank gun, you can get 2 cards of them. The Pak 43 can deal with IS-2s and King Tigers. You also have the ME-410 in the air tab that can deal with a lot of tanks, especially, you know, medium tanks, if you can control the skies. I think if I were going to look at weaknesses for this deck, the anti-air tab is definitely a weakness. It has strong units, but you only get 2 choices and you only get 2 cards. You cannot cover all phases A, B and C with that anti-air tab, so you have to make a choice somewhere. I think it is a fairly tough deck to play on balanced income, so I'm going to put that down as a slight weakness. I think if you trade poorly in the early game, you may suffer with this deck. But Shaun, I think, is a really good player. He's so used to playing balanced that I think he overcomes that without maybe not realising himself. Balanced income with this deck, it does make it tough, but it is definitely a good deck if you succeed. In terms of opportunities, I think the big one is it can take down IS-2s and King Tigers. It isn't limited. It's not as though if you pick the deck and you come up against IS-2 divisions that suddenly you can't do anything. It has the options available to it, so that's a big opportunity for this deck. I think in terms of threats, the big threat is the air control. The weakness is AA, but the threat is if you lose control of the skies, suddenly you lose a lot of options available to you. I think this deck succeeds with that ME-410 fighter bomber taking down the enemy's infantry support weapons. That allows your Panzergrens to engage without threat of coming under fire from OB-25s. It also means that you can't take down the enemy's AT guns. That kind of means that it's going to be pretty tough to push forwards with once you get out of B phase. You're going to be limited to using your Stugs to advance forwards with and have on the front line. You need to be able to take out the enemy's AT guns to allow you to advance forwards. If you've got control of the sky, you can use your ME-410s to take out the enemy AT guns. Okay, hopefully you enjoyed this. This was the first ever pro deck review. I want to build up this series in the future. I'll get lots more of these decks out to you. Jump into my Discord, let me know your thoughts. Hopefully you're going to pick up the Division as well. Let me know down in the comments if you play the Division, you know, how you get on with the Division. And a big thanks to Shaun as well for helping me out with this video. Thanks very much for watching. I am Angry Bird. I will see you next time.